My name is Stephen Humphreys, and I am an attorney from Athens, Georgia, originally an intellectual property attorney, and involuntarily became a corruption in government attorney. And I appreciate your being here. If you're watching this video, it means that you're somebody who cares about good government in Georgia. I'm here because I saw things that I simply could not walk away from and leave alone as an attorney. To give you a little background on how I got started, I was an intellectual property attorney, graduated from the University of Georgia Law School, so I represented lots of professors at the University of Georgia because they wrote books and made films and artwork and everything, and that was my legal area. But because of those connections with the university community, I ended up defending a University of Georgia professor in a tenure revocation action, which is a very rare thing, almost never happens. But as you can understand, if you're a professor and your tenure is revoked, you are destroyed. Your career is destroyed. It's a major undertaking against a professor. This tenure revocation action was initiated by then UGA President Michael Adams. The professor I represented, Professor Dezo Benedict, happened to be one of President Adams' most outspoken critics. President Adams induced the Attorney General of Georgia to initiate the tenure revocation action. A tenure revocation is so serious, it's actually prosecuted by the Attorney General of Georgia. So there I was, the copyright lawyer from Athens, Georgia, defending this professor against the entire machinery of the state, from the University of Georgia, the University of Georgia Office of Legal Affairs, and the Attorney General's office, and every other state office that could come to bear. And what I saw, I couldn't believe. And when I go around and tell this story, lots of people don't believe it. Attorney General Sam Owens has made a cottage industry of going around the state saying that this story is incredible, there's no truth to it, nobody should believe it. I agree with him on only one thing. I could not believe it, what I saw myself, and that's why I haven't walked away from this. What I saw in that attempt to revoke a University of Georgia professor's tenure in what was a vindictive vendetta by the president of the university, and in which the Attorney General of Georgia obliged, was, and we proved this in the hearing, the professor ended up keeping his job because we not only proved that the charges they brought against him in order to revoke his tenure, which to revoke a professor's tenure requires very serious charges. It's not for, dropping an ice cream cone. It's for committing felonies and very serious delicts. And in this case, they charged him with academic fraud, which is about the worst thing you can charge a professor with. And in that, we had a 3-day evidentiary hearing, called witnesses under oath, presented documents. In that hearing, we not only proved that the charges that were brought against that professor were false, we proved, and the hearing committee agreed with us and dismissed all the charges, we proved that the charges were false, that the president of the University of Georgia and the Attorney General of Georgia who brought the charges knew they were false before they brought them. We proved that they concealed documents that proved that their charges were false and that they knew they were false. And while they were concealing the documents that would have cleared the professor of all the charges, and and denying those documents existed under oath, and denying they existed in response to open records requests. It's a question many people have. We had to independently recover all these documents because the state of Georgia did not produce them. The Attorney General of Georgia had them in his possession and concealed them, and we produced the documents that they hid. We also proved that while they were concealing the actual evidence, they manufactured or attempted to manufacture false evidence to support the charges against the professor. And that is not, as Sam Olens tries to say, some wild speculative charge that we are making. We have the documentation. We have the correspondence in which UGA officials impersonated University of Georgia students, sent out false correspondence in their names, created fake computer accounts, and logged on to computer databases in the names of the students, all of which, as you can imagine, violates a long list of state and federal criminal statutes for identity fraud, mail fraud, and wire fraud, and computer fraud. And they did that in order to manufacture false evidence to support the charges against Professor Benedict. We proved that at a hearing. We have all the documentation of that. It's not something that's a wild speculative charge. It's something that we have a document or the sworn testimony from one of our adversaries to support everything we say. Attorney General Sam Olens says there is no credible evidence to support any of the allegations. That is a patently and demonstrably false statement by the Attorney General of the state of Georgia. Sam Olens says that these allegations are frivolous and nonsensical. They are not frivolous or nonsensical. They are all completely documented, and they violate state and federal criminal statutes. And Sam Olens has said, I am an outlandish conspiracy theorist, and I'm quoting him exactly. And I have more than a theory that there was a conspiracy. We have the documentation and the evidence that the Attorney General of Georgia has denied, that the governor of Georgia has ignored, as we have requested him to appoint an independent investigator to look into this, since the Attorney General of Georgia, Sam Olens, refuses to, saying that it's nonsensical and frivolous and nothing to it. That is serious not only because the Attorney General is abdicating his responsibility to investigate and prosecute crimes in the state of Georgia, particularly in state government in the state of Georgia, which is his constitutional responsibility. He is also overlooking this documentation and overlooking the evidence of criminal wrongdoing that occurred in his office of the Attorney General of Georgia. And I can't honestly think of a more serious lapse or abuse of power than to cover up wrongdoing in your own office.
Stephen, you mentioned there were federal laws violated. Has there been any attempt to bring federal authorities into this case?
Well, I can't talk about what other law enforcement authorities are or should be looking into this, but it's very well documented that both state and federal criminal statutes have been violated. The state and federal RICO statutes have been violated. One of the main violations under state law, but is also federal law, is it is a crime as a government official, state or federal, to knowingly falsify any state agency report. That came up when recently when it came out that a lot of Veterans Administration records had been falsified to make it appear, other than what was the reality. And that I remember listening to President Obama on the radio, and the first thing he said is, well, if that happened, that's a crime. It's not just a convenience to cover my rear at work. It's not just political hardball, and for very good reason. It is a crime to knowingly falsify a state agency report or a federal agency report. And in one of the cases, I represent two clients mainly, two clients that have filed actions. One is Professor Benedict, who's the UGA professor who was the victim of the RICO crimes that occurred in his case are mainly evidence tampering, identity fraud, mail and wire fraud, which are federal statutes, computer fraud, where there's actually a state computer fraud statute that says you cannot go on to a computer and log on as somebody you are not in order to create false misrepresentations about anything. There's a federal statute that says you cannot use the U.S. mail for those purposes, and you cannot use the telephone and computer wires to propagate any kind of, disseminate any kind of misrepresentation, either for illicit gain or to harm somebody else. And that is clearly what happened in the case of Professor Benedict. In the case of Anthony Tricoli, who's the former president of Georgia Perimeter College, this is documented and undisputed. The Attorney General of Georgia says this is all frivolous. It is documented and undisputed that the official budget reports for Georgia Perimeter College were knowingly falsified, that reports went to President Tricoli claiming there was a normal budget process and a almost $4 million surplus at the college at the same time that university system and Georgia Perimeter College budget officials had been frantically emailing back and forth to each other about how there was a huge budget crisis looming. And a month after it was officially reported to Anthony Tricoli that the budget was fine and that there was a $4 million surplus, he was forced out of office with a grandiose announcement that all of a sudden there was a $25 million budget deficit. This is a month after a $4 million surplus was reported to him. The Attorney General of Georgia says that that is Anthony Tricoli's fault, that Anthony Tricoli should have put on a green eye shade and looked at the accounting ledgers himself and seen that the reports to him were misrepresentations, and they were knowing misrepresentations. They were representing one thing to President Tricoli and emailing something different back and forth to each other. So they were knowingly falsifying the reports to Anthony Tricoli, and what the Attorney General, Sam Olens, has missed in admitting that those reports were falsified, but saying no crime occurred, there's no problem, and that Anthony Tricoli is to blame for the budget deficit at GPC, is back to the statute. The Georgia statute is OCGA section 161020 that says it is a crime, it is a felony to knowingly falsify any state agency report, which the budget of a college is a state agency report. It was knowingly falsified. That is an open and shut case, documented and admitted that a major crime occurred that was used to harm Anthony Tricoli. It also harmed the state of Georgia. It almost destroyed Georgia Perimeter College, which in fact is about to go out of existence, but in the aftermath of this $25 million budget crisis that was engineered behind President Tricoli's back, the school had to let 300 people go. It lost 10,000 students per semester in enrollment since then, and is about to go out of existence. And that is another claim that the Attorney General makes, that none of these things, he claims that all these state officials are immune from any lawsuit by Deso Benedict or Anthony Tricoli, saying the state is immune from what they say is a private tort suit by these individuals that were harmed. What Attorney General is missing is that the RICO statute specifically authorizes that suit by a person who's harmed by these criminal acts. And the reason for that in the RICO statute is the RICO statute recognizes that this kind of falsification of state agency reports, evidence tampering, knowing bringing of false charges in order to try to enact a vendetta against a professor, all of those things, they harm Professor Benedict, they harm President Tricoli, but they harm the state of Georgia. They harm the university system of Georgia. And that is why they are criminalized in the criminal code of Georgia. And that is why the RICO statute says that anybody harmed by such an act has a civil action. And the RICO statute also provides for a criminal prosecution for those same actions. We are bringing the civil action on behalf of Anthony Tricoli and Deso Benedict because the Attorney General of Georgia, whose duty it is to enforce these criminal laws, has refused to either investigate or prosecute the crimes that he admits occurred. He admits that the budget reports at Georgia Perimeter College were falsified. The RICO statute authorizes me to bring a suit on behalf of Anthony Tricoli. The RICO statute also authorizes Attorney General Sam Olens to criminally prosecute the people who violated that statute. I am bringing the civil actions because Sam Olens refuses to prosecute the crimes that he admits occurred. And in fact, he is defending those individuals in the civil actions. So he's not only not prosecuting, he is defending the people who he admits committed the crimes.
Does anyone else in the state of Georgia have standing to force the state to bring the criminal action, or is it solely discretionary at the generals?
Well, prosecutors have a lot of discretion. That's one reason that the RICO statute provides for this civil action on behalf of somebody who is harmed. The other avenue is there is a statute that allows the governor to appoint a special investigator called a special attorney general to look into this very kind of thing. And that statute contemplates a situation just like this in which the attorney general either cannot or will not investigate and enforce the law. In this case, the attorney general has a huge conflict of interest because much of the wrongdoing that's alleged to have occurred in his office. In my mind, that gives him a greater duty to investigate, but it also gives him a conflict of interest. So I have written to Governor Nathan Deal to invoke this statute and 3 times requested Governor Deal to appoint a special investigator to look into these criminal allegations. First letter was written October 31st of 2014. There was another letter in January of 2015 after Sam Olens publicly refused to investigate any of the evidence or allegations. And then I wrote another letter to Governor Deal in April of 2015. Governor Deal has not answered any of the letters. I wrote the third letter after Attorney General Olens completely contradicted himself and made another knowingly false statement in order to deter this investigation. Each time I have called for an independent investigation, the Attorney General, Sam Olens, has spoken out against an independent investigation. He did so, was quoted in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution after I wrote my first letter. So I wrote back to Governor Deal and said the Attorney General has publicly refused to investigate, so you need to appoint the special investigator. After that letter, Sam Olens wrote a private individual claiming that a full investigation had already been done, which is false. And that was a false statement made, again, to deter an independent investigation. So you have the Attorney General of Georgia making knowingly false statements in order to deter an independent investigation of what happened in these cases. And what would be the harm of having an independent investigation? Sam Olens claims it's all frivolous and nonsensical. If that were the case, then an independent investigation would show that. The reason that these cases are being opposed so strongly is they are not frivolous. There is voluminous and very powerful documentation from the records of the university system itself, as not records we generated. Their own records and documents demonstrate exactly what happened and exactly what we're alleging, and that is why there's such a strong attempt to cover this up and to thwart any independent investigation of what happened.
Stephen, you talked about the fact that they were attempting to remove Dr. Benedict from the University of Georgia, and the fact that Dr. Tricoli did lose his job at Georgia Perimeter College. Has anyone else lost their job as a result of this? Those people who admitted that they had falsified documents at GPC, what action has been taken against them?
Okay, as far as the people who actually falsified documents at Georgia Perimeter College, let me back up a second. A month after it was reported to Anthony Tricoli that there was a $4 million budget surplus at Georgia Perimeter College, the chancellor of the university system, Hank Huckabee, announced a $25 million budget deficit. In April, there's a $4 million surplus reported. In March, there's a $4 million surplus reported. In April, the university system announces a $25 million deficit. There's never been any independent investigation of where that $25 million in overspending went. The university system was allowed to do a self-audit that was overseen by the people who misreported the budget information. In that self-audit, only about $6 million of the overspending has been accounted for. That money, the $6 million in overspending, came from misallocation and miscalculation of employee fringe benefits by the human resources director at Georgia Perimeter College. That person, who has the only documented budget error out of that $25 million, still has his job. The Georgia Perimeter College head budget official who directly reported to Anthony Tricoli that there was a $4 million surplus when actually the numbers supposedly showed a $16 to $25 million deficit, was allowed to retire and is collecting his state pension. Other GPC budget officials working under him, who it was documented actually were keeping two different sets of books, were mostly transferred to other schools and have other university system jobs. That's at Georgia Perimeter College. And you understand that all colleges and universities in Georgia are overseen by the university system of Georgia and the Board of Regents. The university system has its own budget officials who apparently were receiving these deficit reports. They say that they knew about deficit spending at Georgia Perimeter College for 3 years, yet deficit spending was never mentioned in any budget evaluation, performance evaluation, budget hearing. They have numerous annual and semi-annual procedures to track the budget. Never was any mention of any deficit spending made either to President Tricoli or, as we have now confirmed, to the chancellor of the university system at the time, Errol Davis. So supposedly a $25 million budget deficit was accumulating over 3 years and not being reported to anybody. And in fact, false budget information was being reported to President Tricoli indicating a surplus. And all of those university system employees who say they knew about the budget deficit for 3 years and never reported it either to the president or the chancellor all still have their jobs. When I am explaining these cases to groups like this or presenting them in court, I frequently run into the objection and resistance that this is simply not believable. It's not believable that state officials would knowingly falsify a college budget report in order to harm the president, or that the Attorney General of Georgia would knowingly call a witness to give false testimony to revoke a professor's tenure using evidence they knew was criminally manufactured while the real evidence had been hidden. And that is not it's not believable. The only problem is it is true. It is completely documented that it happened. I wouldn't believe it if somebody told me that if I hadn't seen the documentation for myself. I couldn't believe it when I was first defending Professor Benedict against the Attorney General's office and saw the evidence unfold that the Attorney General had withheld documents, that the Attorney General had called witnesses to give testimony that the witness and the Attorney General both knew was false, which is otherwise known as perjury, that the Attorney General was suborning perjury, that University of Georgia officials would be impersonating UGA students in order to create a false paper trail, that a dean at the University of Georgia would log on to a computer database in the name of a UGA student in order to create a false record to be used against a professor to destroy his career. I could not believe it myself. And that's exactly why I could not walk away from it when I saw it. So I have gone from being a mild-mannered copyright attorney to now fighting the Attorney General of Georgia and the governor and everybody else. But so be it. I could not believe it, and I could not believe that is what the Office of the Attorney General of Georgia is supposed to be doing. The Attorney General asserts that the Georgia Perimeter College budget officials who knowingly falsified the budget reports, resulting in $19 million that's completely unaccounted for, that they are immune for their actions. So the doctrine of sovereign immunity in Georgia that's supposed to prevent state officials from being sued every time they open their mouth to say anything or every time they do anything or make a decision has turned into a doctrine of sovereign impunity, where, according to the Attorney General of Georgia, state officials are immune for knowingly committing crimes. They are immune for falsifying college budgets in order to steal money. That they are immune for knowingly hiding documents and fabricating false evidence in violation of identity fraud, mail fraud, and wire fraud, and computer fraud, criminal statutes, that they are immune for those actions, and that neither the individuals involved nor the state can be sued. At the same time that the Attorney General is opposing those civil actions, the Attorney General is refusing to prosecute the documented crimes. That's the other alternative, that I shouldn't have to even bring the lawsuit, that the Attorney General would prosecute these people for the crimes and everything would be corrected. But the Attorney General has not only refused to prosecute the individuals, but is defending them in the civil suits. You could not find a case to prosecute with better evidence, with the documentation from the other side's records.